This week on Kyle's Garage, you can see my workbench is actually fairly clear, but the project is behind the camera and there's new tools, which means it's definitely not one of these cars. It's a motorcycle. And this one is going to be our project for the day. It's my 1989 Honda XR250, and I've got a project coming up on this one that's going to require a bunch of work. But first, I've got to get a quick tune-up because I want to take it for one more ride yet this year, and the season's winding down. Pulling it out. One of the tools that I'd always been wanting was a lift, and with the low ceilings in this garage, it doesn't make sense to have a car lift, but I do enough motorcycle stuff that I decided to spring for a motorcycle lift. Just to make my life a little easier. And this one I found on Facebook Marketplace for half of what they go for new, and the guy had never even actually used it. So it's a nice piece of kit. I'm going to get the XR loaded up onto it and show you what we're doing today. And what this motorcycle needs actually isn't much. And I could repair things, but instead I'm actually going to replace something today. And that is here on the front end, which is why I have it up on a center stand, and then the strap's actually holding down the back end so I can get to the front axle. What I'm going to do is take the front wheel off, and I'm replacing the entire forks. And the reason for that is these have blown seals in them, and the springs are super tired, and I know the internals are absolutely screwed. So I'm instead just going to replace lock, stock, and barrel because I bought a parts bike a couple months ago, and it's going to be easier for me to get this up and running because I want to go ride it this weekend. So I'll get it up and running by just slapping in a new set of forks that I've got over on the workbench. First is this headlight, which isn't actually a headlight because there's no bulb in it. None of the wiring is connected, which ought to say something about the condition of this machine. And then the next thing I'm going to do is this front axle. And don't have to remove these completely, just have to loosen them. So then we can get the axle out. So there is our front wheel out of the way. From there, going to loosen up, take off the brake caliper and its pinch bolts here, take off my trip meter, and then actually don't have to remove the front fender. We'll prepare everything else, but just getting these lower forks taking the rest of the way apart. And these caliper bolts are one longer than the other, so you want to make sure to either label them or thread them back to where they were to make sure they go back together correctly. We can get the brake line out. Just gonna swing that over and hang it out of the way. It's safe right there. Now, if you're curious what could possibly go wrong in the front end of one of these, if you're not familiar with motorcycle front suspensions, what is inside of here is a big long spring, and then there's also a damping rod, and then there should be oil down here at the bottom. And there should be some amount of resistance, which this front end has none of because these upper fork seals have gone bad. And it essentially, the last ride that I went on was a big 3-day epic with some friends, and it pumped all of its oil out of the upper end of it, and the valving is off for the riding that I want to do and my weight. So I'm going to take these off, rebuild them on the bench, and in the meantime I have a spare set that I'm going to throw on that doesn't have blown fork seals. So I've just got to loosen up a couple of the 12mm bolts up here at the top, and I should be able to slide these right out. And I don't need to remove these bolts completely, I just need them to loosen, because the side of these triple clamps, that's what these are called, is essentially a pinch. So I'm just loosening these so that the fork can slide out, since those are just pinching it in. All right. So those are all loose. Let's see if we can slide this out of here. Hopefully this one pops out just as easily. is not wanting to play along. Just tighten the straps on the back. There we go. Front end disassembled. There's our crummy forks on the lift. We'll go over here to the parts stash. Set of fork tubes. And what I like to do before removing the tops of these, the easy way is when they're still on the bike and the triple trees are still clamped to it, is to loosen this large nut that is fine thread while it's on there. But if you already have them off the bike, what I say is to get your hands on a 22 mil socket that fits nice and snug. I like to use impact sockets for this. And then I'll use an impact and just zip it right off. It'll be no big deal. So makes life nice and easy. If you don't have an impact, you'll want to clamp this down in soft jaws or something like that in a vise, or install them on the bike. I stand by installing them on the bike is the one way to make sure you will not screw any of this up. An impact is second best. So interesting. These, someone has been in and screwed with them. They have PVC spacers. Huh, somebody tried to increase the spring rate by adding a little bit of clamping pressure to them. So that adds to the spring stack in there. Sounds like there is oil in these at least. Yeah, spring's telling me that there is, and it's halfway clean. Doesn't smell absolutely terrible. So I've got a towel here, and what I will do is pop the spring out and let it drain for a second first. And that's going to kind of tell me a little bit about the oil that's in it. And when you're draining these, you want to cycle them a couple times just to make sure that it kind of pumps everything out. Not looking for perfection, just looking for kind of good enough. And we'll do the other. This one might be holding on to a little bit more of its oil. All right, so we're going to skip straight to assembling. 500cc comes out to about 18 ounces. So this quart has about 16 in it. So we can just that one's actually putting up a little bit of resistance, which is nice. So we need another about 3 ounces. And the nice thing is it's not mission critical to have exactly the same, and get me in the ballpark is actually pretty good. So this one's filled, so we'll go ahead and put our spring back in. Same side down. Our spring cap, the spacer that was installed, the other spacer that was installed. You want to make sure as you're tightening that you do not cross thread this. Of course, I mean, you don't want to cross thread anything ever, but you especially do not want to do it on these fork tubes because you will have to replace them. There we go. And same story, second verse here. Running that down past the seal. Not actually impacting anything because I don't want to do that. And just like that, we've got our forks refreshed in a very loose use of that term. And we can go ahead and stick them back into our triple clamps on the bike. This is our brake side, so it goes over here on the left. So what I'm struggling with here is this piece does not want to slide up into that triple clamp, and you can just see right there where the split is. And so I just need to get that opened up just a little bit more. All right, so this is one I'm not super proud of. I had to take a screwdriver and give it just a small tap in there. That allowed that to seat completely. I just work that out and I'll put the bolts back in. But that is why I keep a cheaper, lower quality set of screwdrivers in my toolbox. I like to have a nice set. Then I have a set for doing things that, you know, aren't necessarily by the book. Not ideal, but it's something that's okay to do from time to time. Think outside the box when you're out in the garage. If you are using everything exactly as it should be per the manual, that might work on a brand new car that just rolled off the showroom floor, but we're dealing with stuff that's been hacked together 8 different ways over 50 years. The fact of the matter is you're gonna have to think outside the box. And to me, that's part of the fun of wrenching on stuff. Doing little things like that, yeah, it's simple, but it can be a little rewarding when you figure something out for the first time. So don't be afraid to experiment and figure things out. And then what I will do is, it's gonna be easier for me to reinstall the wheel first, and then put the caliper and this speed sensor. Well, actually, this one will go on first. All right, and we're on to the wheel. So I've got the axle snugged up, but I don't necessarily have to torque on that one. And before I actually go to tighten these pinch bolts, what I'm going to do is get the motorcycle down on its suspension and then cycle that front suspension a couple times to make sure that my axle is parallel and my axle tubes are clocked correctly before I pinch this down. Because if I were to pinch this right now, that could bind up my front suspension in a weird way. So I want to make sure that all of this is still loose and can move around. And then I'll lower the bike down, cycle it a couple times, pinch that down. Almost ready to go. And just like that, quick little project, got the front end refreshed, and then I've got my forks ready to be disassembled over the winter and actually gone through and valved to perfection, set up properly. This is just a temporary fix, but it's gonna get me started and it's gonna get me out riding this weekend. It's kind of rainy and gross outside right now, but you know what? That's never stopped me before, so let's go see how it works in the yard. That'll do it for this week's Kyle's Garage. Go work on your projects. I've got some fun to have.